2015, and to do so on behalf of my council colleagues. We are met on this Tuesday, the 6th of January, 2015, in the City Center Conference Room. The time is 2:02. The meeting is recorded, will be posted to the Provo City website. Please be aware that the microphones are sufficiently sensitive to pick up side conversations and rustling objects.
We'll try.
Mr. Sewell, or rather Mr. Parker, would you kindly begin the roll call?
I will. Wayne Parker. Dave Sewell.
Gary Winterton.
Cade Van Buren. Gary Garrett.
Kim Santiago.
Al Miller.
Matthew Taylor.
Brian Jones.
Louise Jurgens.
And our Deputy Mayor.
Corey Norris.
Thank you for joining us. Would you care to join us here?
Oh, I'm going to be in and out, so
all right.
If I fall asleep, I haven't felt very good, so if I fall asleep, I much prefer to be over here.
Yes, I know the feeling. We are delighted to welcome Mr. Parker in the role as the offerer of the prayer and extend to him the opportunity to share anything of his background and duties as he wishes.
Thank you very much. You probably know lots more than you ever wanted to know. So, as I indicated to Louise, I will be a lot more judicious when I take vacation the week prior to the council meeting. Because I didn't find someone else to pray, so I will take that opportunity. Excuse me. Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful as we meet together this afternoon as members of the municipal council and the staff and public and others who are involved in this work meeting. We are grateful for the opportunity to be gathered. Thankful for this new year, which gives an opportunity for new starts and for new direction. We invite Thy Spirit to enlighten the minds and hearts of those who participate in our meetings today. We also ask for a special blessing upon our city employees, many of whom find themselves in harm's way as they work to support our community and to protect and strengthen it. We ask for Thy blessing to be with them during their work day today. May, again, Thy Spirit illuminate the things that we discuss today, and may we operate in a manner which should be civil and respectful and value the contributions of all who participate. These favors and blessings we pray for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Parker. We excuse Councilmember Hales and also Mayor Curtis, who is out of town. We turn to a discussion regarding a proposed resolution requested by the Utah League of Cities and Towns, calling for the Utah State Legislature to increase funding for transportation and infrastructure-related activities. Mr. Mumford, we're pleased to turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, members of council. The issue at hand today is a presentation that's been proposed by the Utah League of Cities and Towns in order for them to be able to be prepared for their local officials' day to be held on January 28th. And if Provo City is to participate, we must have a resolution passed on this issue on the January 20th meeting. That's just to kind of give you a sense for the time frame that you're looking at. The issue that they've raised is that the B&C road revenues, or the revenues in which cities use, they get money from the state in order to perform enhancements and improvements on their roads network. The issue is that they feel like the B&C road revenues don't meet the adequacy test. And this is just an example of three other different taxes that have increased exponentially more than what the B&C road revenues have increased. And you can see the individual income tax is 41% higher, and this is based on a 2007 study. And I asked if they had anything more recent, and they indicated they did not. And so the local sales tax has increased 47.4%, but the corporate franchise tax has increased 138%. And so you can see that the B&C road revenues aren't anywhere close to what those other numbers are. And so,
Brian, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The B&C road increase is basically due to the cost of gas increases. Is that point?
B&C road revenues are come from the gas tax, but there are other elements at play that have increased the road tax. I mean, excuse me, the cost of gas that is not the road tax. And so,
Okay.
The B&C road revenues come strictly from the road tax, and then the state takes about 70% off the top, and then they distribute the remaining 30% based on the number of road miles within a city.
So our B&C increases are not really tied to the price of gas.
No, there's not been an
that's
increase
very
in the revenues since 1997. So it's been a source of concern for a lot of municipalities that where are they going to be able to go to get the revenues they need to perform the necessary road improvements. And in fact, this was a conversation that the council, the former council, with before the 3 new members came. This is the discussion that we had. We wanted to find a way to increase road revenues, and that's when we ultimately came up with the Utility Transportation Fund. And so the B&C road funds, the cities don't have any other recourse beyond that to get the money that they need in order to make those improvements and those enhancements to the road network within their municipality. And so that's kind of the issue that has brought the ULCT to this state, is that cities don't have any other way to get money for these road enhancements unless they take from their general fund. And so that's why it's a major concern for the ULCT. And so Provo, I reached out to the ULCT. They had some numbers that I wanted to present to you. Provo spent $4.7 million on road transportation spending in FY 2011, but the B&C allocation was only about $4 million. And so even Provo's had to dip into the general fund in order to make some of those enhancements in years past. And so the 2 options that have been presented by the ULCT in the proposed resolution that should be in your materials is either a quarter-cent local option sales tax increase with those dollars being dedicated to road funding issues within the city, similar to what a RAP tax would be, with those dollars being dedicated to recreation, arts, and arts programming. This money would be dedicated strictly to road maintenance. The second is an increase to the gas tax, most likely about 5 cents per gallon increase. And so that's the numbers that they presented, the projections that they've given, is for the local option sales tax increase about $4.9 million a year over the next 10 years. And for the statewide gas tax increase, about $585,000 per year over the next 10 years is the average that they have projected for Provo City. And if you recall from this slide, we spent about $4.7 million in transportation spending. This comes a lot closer to it than the gas tax increase.
Bryce, would you wait just a moment, please? I think we are about to welcome a colleague. Councilmember Hales has joined us. Please.
And so, as part of the UTF, the Utility Transportation Fund that was passed in 2013, one of the components of that says in the event that any state or county legislation is enacted that either changes the rate of the tax or enacts a new tax, the purpose of which tax is to provide funds for the operation, improvement, or maintenance of municipal streets, and that results in the city receiving increased revenues, then essentially the municipal council has to meet within 12 months to discuss whether or not they want to continue the utility transportation fund in some form or another. And it indicates that a public hearing must be held on the city budget, so long as this question is specifically addressed. And so, just as a reminder about the Utility Transportation Fund fees, I wanted to show this to you so you could see what different businesses, public use entities, and residential customers are paying currently for the Utility Transportation Fund. These are based on the trip ends, which means how much trip generation do the businesses generate, and that's going to determine where they fall on the business platform. Same with public use, and residential is broken out by single family and multi. And so, some policy questions and considerations that we thought should be brought before the council are relate somewhat with the UTF. And so, since the dollars from the UTF come from Provo residents and stay with Provo residents, we wondered if that wasn't a more efficient and equitable alternative than those that are suggested by the state, especially the B&C Road Fund, which breaks it down based upon, first they give 70% to the state, and then the remaining 30% split up based on road fund. So relative to the language reports that we showed concerning the finding of other sources of funding, was it the intention of the council to have the UTF serve as a long-term solution for road funding issues, or was there a hope to increase diversification for funding these transportation-related activities? Meaning, are you interested in getting other activities out there that are available for the funding of these transportation activities? And then concerning the proposed options, the two different proposed options, is one of those proposed methods, meaning the sales tax option or the gas tax increase, have more merit than another? And if so, are you interested in specifying that preferred method in a resolution that we could present to ULCT? And then finally, if cities aren't given methods by which they can solve their road funding issues, will that impact Provo City's ability to collect UTF? And what we mean by that is, if cities have no other recourse, are multiple cities going to turn to the UTF as a potential way to fund the road funding activities and eventually cause a challenge to the UTF? And so those are the questions and considerations, and if you have any questions for me, I'm available.
When we say cause a challenge, it could be a legal challenge that's brought to the court system, or a legislative challenge that's appealed to the legislature to mitigate or end the UTF. So the reason for that question, I thought, being if cities have more options, they may not turn to our system to solve their problems, which may cause additional concerns with vested parties.
I don't recall a previous incident which we, or instance, I should say, in which we have turned to an invitation from the Utah League to consider a proposal. Was there a particular reason for this precedent?
Well, the ULCT, it serves 245 membership cities, and so they want to act in a manner to unify the cities with concerns to the state legislature.
I think, not in my memory, have they, not in the 4 years I've been with the council, more before, have they asked for the cities to adopt a resolution in support of something. Because the state legislature has been so resistant to increase the funding options for local roads, they have made a very concerted effort this year to build a coalition. More so than just their staff delegates or board members, not board members, but executive committees. And they've had press releases and news conferences and multiple venues to try and lobby the legislature to act on this issue. And this is just one more tool they would like at their disposal to do that.
And they like the ability to approach each legislator and indicate which cities within that legislator's district have actually approved this resolution. And they were uncomfortable giving me a comprehensive list prior to this meeting, but they said as local officials' day gets closer, they're happy to provide all the council members with a list of all the cities who have passed a resolution.
So it's their unprecedented move that results in this unprecedented entry into our agenda.
Wayne, do you have any memory if they've done similar requests in the past?
One time I recall pretty vividly was prior to the 2002 Winter Olympics, when cities were asked to adopt resolutions to support state funding for Olympic venues, for example, and transportation improvements. And they gathered a broad coalition of cities across the Wasatch Front, at least in that regard. So it's not entirely unprecedented, but I can't remember a time other than the last 10 years, 15 years when that's occurred. So it's pretty rare.
Given that the mayor chairs the board
As the current
Utah
president of the
League.
league, that's, yeah, he's been in these discussions.
Does the administration have a stance on this issue?
I think, and Corey, I don't know, you may have a better sense than I do, but I think the general sense has been we recognize the need across the state for greater local funding for transportation. And that can take a number of forms. It could be transportation for roads, it could be transportation for multi-use trails, for bike lanes, potentially for transit. And so the idea of a broad-based revenue source that could meet a wide variety of transportation needs, it's pretty important across the state. In terms of road maintenance, one slice of that larger puzzle, we have largely fixed our own problem with the Utility Transportation Fund. And so again, the latest discussions that I've heard relative to the state legislation will be a broader definition of transportation, potentially even broader than the current B&C road uses that are permitted. So if this additional revenue source came in, it could certainly be used to supplant the dollars that are generated today by the UTF, but there would be a broader potential use of those dollars beyond what the UTF was designed to do. So again, the whole idea, as some will recall when we created this, the idea of mandating a public hearing within 12 months of the effective date of any new funding source really was to gauge the real numbers, not just projections about what those would generate, and then to force a public debate around the question of whether you remove the UTF, reduce it, or utilize these dollars to do other things. And so, again, we'll force a discussion, which I think is exactly what you would want to have happen.
I think even though Provo has largely solved our current issue, and I'm not particularly advocating a position, there's certainly trade-offs with pushing this in this direction, which we talked about. There are some benefits, though, I think that Provo could be served by. One, it's always good to have options available, and as those options come in, you can decide how you're going to apply them. The fewer options you have, fewer choices you have. And so just from a vantage point of having options available to you, this may be positive. But I think it is also important to think about if other cities are not left with options, what do they do, and how will that impact what you've solved? And so it may be good for other cities to have those options as well. And so even protecting your own city interests, it may be good to have.
The other thing I just mentioned, and it's been a long-standing concern, I think, for many of us in the municipal world, is we recognize at some point there is a tolerance level for sales tax rate. There's probably a ceiling. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's 8% or 10% or 25%. I don't know what the number is, but at some point the electorate will say enough's enough, and many of them have probably already said that. But each new increment of sales tax that is allocated to UTA or is allocated to counties or is allocated to some other entity is one less increment of sales tax that would be available to the state and to local governments. And so we've affectionately called it headroom over the years. We don't know how much it is, but we know it's limited. And so one of the concerns is that if we don't try to do something with a sales tax, at some point that capacity will get swallowed up by others. And again, every quarter cent that goes somewhere is a quarter cent less that the city will have at some point in time once we get whatever the headroom cap is. And so the idea of staking, putting a kind of stake in the ground, particularly around transportation, again, it's one of our core fundamental responsibilities as a local government, is to provide a quality transportation system. And so again, rather than have that get absorbed by some other interest group, probably doesn't hurt at some point to put a stake in the ground. So there's some value from that perspective as well to think about this.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
So
Please.
given that explanation, are you saying then that the state putting that stake in the ground takes away from the headroom the city has, or helps maintain a position for the city? I didn't quite
Okay, I guess my point is.
Are they considered another entity, or are they considered us, I guess is what.
Right,
what
and again, and the state has this headroom discussion frequently as well. You know, every time there's a wrap tax or a, you know, some other component of the sales tax that gets siphoned out of headroom, it limits the flexibility of basic underlying units of government, whether that's the state or the cities, to capture that headroom at some point in the future if it's needed. And so I guess the point I'm making is if you were to adopt a resolution and you wanted to include both sales, you know, either or sales tax or gas tax increase, that's probably smart. I would not suggest, if you're going to go through the pain of adopting a resolution advocating a tax increase, that you ought to, if you're going to do that, you ought to at least keep the stake in the ground relative to the sales tax.
Sounds like this sales tax, local option sales tax, is a stake in the ground in favor of the city.
Right. Now again, local option sales tax can also take a variety of forces. It can be voter approved, which our 1% local option sales tax is. The wrap tax is a voter approved sales tax. And so again, and we don't know yet what that legislation is going to look like, whether it will be enactable by a city council, whether it's enactable by a county and is applied across the county, whether it's authorized, where municipal councils are authorized to put it on the ballot. Again, we don't know what all that looks like yet, and we haven't seen draft legislation, but again, that's another element to consider. This may be something that needs to be put on the ballot and enacted by the residents, as opposed to just enacted by elected officials.
May we go back to the resolution itself and make sure?
I think the resolution up here. I did put this from the resolution.
But this is the heart of the resolution.
Yeah, this is essentially what they're proposing as alternative methods for solving that transportation funding issue.
So Bryce, I have a question about the money that we would get from the quarter-cent sales tax increase. Is that $4.25 million that would come to our city, or is that going to be dispersed among?
That's for our city.
That would be Provo's allocation, assuming
okay.
we had a quarter-cent sales tax.
Okay.
Annually?
Annually.
Yes.
Now, you'll recall when we've had the discussion about the wrap tax, which is a 1%, it's about $1.1 million, and so
1/10 of 1%.
yeah, 1/10 of 1%. And so the quarter-cent, you know, is about 2.5 times that amount. So yeah, I guess it must be more if they're up to $4 million is being. I guess it's 3.8.
Current allocation is about $16 million, and so Ryan and I just crunched some numbers real quick, and the ULCT's numbers are a little more aggressive than our numbers. So,
In other words, our resolution would propose to the state legislature that the state legislature adopt an ordinance that would automatically increase the local sales tax by 0.25%.
it doesn't really go into much detail.
Yeah.
I think the intent is it's a local option, which means you would be authorized to either enact the tax or put the tax on the ballot. It wouldn't require it. I think it's designed to be every city would make its own decision, but you couldn't exceed.
But we don't know that for sure.
We don't know yet what the legislation is going to be.
I think it's designed to give you an option, but let you bear the political pain.
That's exactly right. They don't want to raise the taxes. They want to authorize you to raise taxes if you choose to. That would be the typical modus operandi.
But we could do that anyway.
Not for sales tax. You can do it for property tax, but you can't do it for sales tax.
Ah.
You're statutorily capped at 1%.
So the wrap tax.
Wrap tax would have to go on the ballot.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
We could
right.
do that, but
You
it
can
would
do
go
that
on
for
the
wrap,
ballot.
right.
This
Right
is
now,
something. This is something where we could exercise our own initiative
Yes.
if we were
It
inclined
essentially
to.
raises the cap from 1% to 1.25%, with that 1/4% being allocated.
So the
to
only
education.
thing that might change is now no longer the necessity of placing it on the ballot.
That could be correct. Again, I haven't seen the legislation. I don't know whether it would give you the unilateral ability as a council to do that, or whether it would just authorize you to pass a resolution putting it on the ballot. Don't know what that looks like yet.
The other issue is what the tax can be used for, because the
Right.
wrap tax can be used for roads.
Right. Correct.
I understand that.
Mr. Chair.
Please, Mr.
And
Garrett.
related to the utility transportation fund, we talk about that being a solution for our city, but isn't it really a short-term or at best a mid-term solution? Because we had some private entities that negotiated out of that basically through a lump sum payment that would carry 4 years, but then at that point, that fund would be potentially reduced, wouldn't it?
It could, or you could exercise your prerogative and put them back into the tax or to the fee, utility transportation fee. We exempted them out in recognition of the one-time payment, but that's clearly at your discretion after that 5-year time period.
I see.
To do whatever you might choose.
The second of those options is one that has been regularly proposed to the legislature for many years without action. And as one looks at these options, one readily sees that the first is the preferable option from the legislative point of view, the state legislative point of view, because it brings no enhanced liability to them, whereas the second one does. So in all likelihood, we're talking about the first one. And the question is, what are the implications for our municipality?
The only other thing you might hear, I mean, the gas tax historically has been perceived as a user fee. Is the more gallons you consume, presumably the more miles you drive, therefore the more use you put on the roads, therefore the more you should contribute to their maintenance. Sales tax takes you a step removed from that. It's not a user fee anymore, and it bears essentially no relationship to the demand you create on the transportation system.
Help me understand that one, because if it's a sales tax on the gas, that
No, this would be a general
General
sales tax.
it's a general sales tax, not,
Yes.
it would not go on, okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
It would be a general sales tax. And so again, there is an argument that says, well, when you buy goods, they all arrive basically by truck to a grocery store or a car lot or wherever you spend your money. And so there's a less direct relationship maybe than the gas tax. But from a tax policy perspective, it's long been the state's view that the gas tax should cover the cost of road maintenance. Users should bear their proportionate share. And this gets you away from that underlying tax philosophy. But it's also a much larger revenue stream. Well,
sorry.
For any recipient, yeah, whether it's state or local.
Well, we talked about trade-offs, and I think that's it. The trade-off for option one here is they give you an option, but you bear the political burden.
Yes.
Option two, you may not bear the political burden, but they get the lion's share of the funding.
That's right.
70%.
Right there.
Right.
So-
Moreover, in the case of one, let's take, for example, this year, suppose that were to be enacted, which would allow us the chance to raise the sales tax this year. At the same time, we've been talking about the real prospect, putting a RAP tax or something related to that on the ballot this fall.
Yep.
And the conjunction of those two events may very well be death to the RAP tax.
Could be very problematic, yeah. So, yeah, no good deed goes unpunished. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a third alternative of, there may not be much room for discussion for this, but if you had a third alternative, you weren't satisfied with either one of these, you could certainly send the league a resolution with your thoughts, whatever they may be. They may not appreciate it as much as one of these two, but
Well, the other option is to do a more generic resolution that just says we support whatever mechanism might be created to allow us to have greater dollars to maintain and operate our road infrastructure. That doesn't get to a specific option, but it does support in general the concept. And I think there are a number of cities who are probably going to do that based on what I'm hearing from my colleagues around the state. We'll take a more generic view.
Would there be any concern about those who did pay the lump sum if we are asking the legislature to look for more money to come to our city when we already have that established?
We
Would there
addressed
be a
that.
problem with that
We
relationship?
addressed that with those who entered into the lump sum agreement, and they recognized that was a risk. They could have made an annual payment for 5 years and chosen not to make one if the UTF went away.
Mhm.
But that was fully disclosed, that if something else came up in that 5-year time period, they would kind of be stuck with what they contributed. So it was done in full disclosure in those groups.
Back to your stake in the ground metaphor, that was relevant to item 1.
Yes. Yeah. Now, again, the other thing I'd suggest about the gas tax is I think at some point the gas tax it's already becoming a marginal revenue source, largely because the only thing it taxes is motor fuel. It doesn't tax electricity to run electric or hybrid vehicles. It doesn't tax natural gas to run compressed natural gas vehicles. And so it takes a relatively small, well, I shouldn't say that, a large slice, but a declining slice of the fuel that is used to fuel vehicles. I think there's a very real possibility we'll see a time when, particularly when we get back into an era of rising gas prices, which is certainly sure to occur as the cycles go, people will cut back on their consumption and they'll buy more fuel-efficient vehicles so they get more miles to the gallon. And so again, as we go through those cycles, the tendency is for the gas tax, because it's based on per gallon, as gallons per mile go down, so also goes down the revenue. And so again, I think the concept of the nickel gas tax is probably great in the short term, but in the long term, I think you may just find yourself right back to the same situation.
Another
in just a few
factor
years.
compounding this point is that for the first time in 50 years, they've started to see a decline in vehicle miles traveled. There's always been increasing, and now we're seeing a decline. That will also affect the amount of, in addition to conservation of gallons, number of miles traveled will have an additional effect.
How much influence does Provo have as a city if we are on this resolution or not on it? If we choose to not be part of it, how does that affect us? How does that affect the likelihood of it passing? What kind of influence is there?
It's hard to know. We understand that one of our legislators will likely be the sponsor of the bill. And so, again, if that's the case, it could be perceived as a negative.
Mm-hmm.
But he's sticking his neck out for the city, and we're not standing back there to back him up if that were the case. I think in terms of solidarity with the league, and I think Matt's raised a very good point, we may have largely solved our own road maintenance problem, but many of our sister cities aren't. They may be looking at our model and wanting to consider that, but up to this point, again, we've been sort of the lone group that's done that. And there may be a point of saying, gosh, we ought to we support the idea of more tools, regardless of what tools cities might opt for. But the idea of having additional tools would be important. And I think thirdly, again, just as the league's trying to build some consensus among its members around what might be good options, for the third largest city in the state to just ignore it, I think could be problematic.
But that softer approach that you refer to,
yes,
may still meet the.
It may well, and I think some may likely do that. So again, it's difficult for me to know. I think one of the things we suggested as we talked about this was maybe on the 20th of January we have Ken Bullock, potentially a legislator, be right before the legislative session starts. I think another week after the 20th. Yeah. Have a legislator come and meet with you in a work session or in the public meeting and talk about what they would like to see. I think we could have. It might be good to get a broader perspective than just what we're talking about here.
Well, I think the motive of solidarity is the most appealing motive in this case, because we've taken the initiative in many respects to solve our own problem already. I wonder if we might invite the staff to prepare an alternative resolution of the softer kind that you referred to, Barry, for our consideration on the 20th.
Sure, you bring both to next meeting and make some decisions between work and general.
If that requires a motion, I'd love to make a motion.
Thank you.
Could we also include the legislator coming? I think that'd be beneficial to hear from.
Sure, we'd be happy to extend that invitation.
Mr. Chair, can we have that resolution prepared prior to the meeting, so we've got maybe more than just day or two.
Yes, yes.
We'll have it distributed with your regular materials. Or would you like it earlier?
I'd like it a week.
Yeah, that would be a week in advance.
We could
Have an email.
We've heard about other cities adopting resolutions. We can look through that list, see if there's a good model out there that's similar to what someone else has done. So we can help you with that as well.
Could I also, this is just me, but I think some of the whereases in this resolution get just a little bit reaching pretty far for what they're really addressing. And let's maybe not make ours quite so.
No, I'm sure
I
ours
agree
will
with that.
be
Can we get down to the
Mercifully-
facts instead of all the-
mercifully briefer.
The
They try
reference
to get
to
every
Also
asthma and
tortuous.
possible
diabetes.
report included in those whereases, and they.
Yeah, I agree.
Darn attorneys. Oh,
Well, they look more like lobbyists than attorneys. Well, same thing. Excuse me, Brian. That's not true.
Yeah, that was more offensive than the other.
so we have Mr. Middleton's motion with these amendments that we also invite either someone from the league or a local legislator
We'll try to make both of it.
to join us, and then that the new resolution be phrased with particular brevity.
Appreciate that. That's my motion.
Is there a second? Mr. Sewell, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimously with Mr. Hale's vote included. I'm happy to say that. Thank you very much. Matt, we'll turn to you for an internal governance policy evaluation, specifically consideration of amendments to the policy
Thank you. No, I don't have a presentation on this one, Bruce. In your materials is a amendment for current council policy on the nature of study or work meeting. I don't have a paper document in front of you. But if you had an opportunity to review that, it largely amends your current policy regarding study meeting, work meetings, and makes it more consistent with what we currently do and how we operate. There may be some questions on what the language that largely eliminates the references to study meeting, a meeting we don't hold anymore. And there's quite a bit of history of how we got to this point. I could go over some of that if that's helpful, or just field questions.
Yes, why don't we invite questions, any pertaining thereto? Mr. Sewell?
Well, mostly this is just making this congruent with current business correct.
Would you be willing to make a motion to that effect?
Motion to approve.
Move that we approve it.
Second, Mr. Hales, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Mr. Beckstrom, welcome to our meeting. We turn to you for a discussion pertaining to an interlocal mutual aid agreement brought by the Public Works Emergency Management Alliance.
I think this is fairly brief, although I'd be happy to entertain any questions you've got. Also here today is Chris Blinzinger, the city's emergency management coordinator, who has a vested interest in these sorts of agreements and what they're utilized for. This is an agreement that's been put together under the auspices of the Utah Chapter of the American Public Works Association. It's been patterned after other similar agreements, mutual aid agreements, particularly the water and wastewater response network within Utah. So it's not plowing a lot of new ground here in terms of format or legal implications or things of that nature. But it focuses on essentially mutual aid practices and procedures between municipalities and counties and special service districts within the state of Utah, the majority of the entities that have signed this agreement thus far are along the Wasatch Front, and it essentially establishes the protocol, procedures, and practices for mutual aid to public works personnel and equipment and resources in case of emergencies, whether they be natural or otherwise, that various communities may face over the course of time.
Mr. Winter.
I don't want to appear selfish here, but I know that some cities get themselves into, because of development and maybe lack of foresight that Provo City had, the lack of foresight to be considered an emergency.
I understand what you're saying, and while it may not be the cause or the nature of the emergency, it may have a magnifying effect on the consequences of the emergency. And I might say, related to that, there is nothing in here that's obligatory. All of these arrangements are voluntary on the part of cities, so we're not obligating ourselves to anything that we feel is inappropriate or unreasonable. And there are also mechanisms in here for reimbursement of those costs, should we determine that it's within our capabilities and reasonableness to respond with our resources, that there are mechanisms for getting reimbursement for those things. So I think with those things in mind, we see this as certainly being desirable and appropriate.
Yes, I think that's an issue that ESOP addressed. How does what difference will this make?
In many regards, it will not make a substantial change in how things are done, but it primarily establishes a consistent level of protocol and processes and documentation of things that are probably largely being done already. Those are particularly useful for both the entity that is suffering from the emergency as well as the entity that is providing resources in terms of getting reimbursement from federal agencies, so should those emergencies qualify for federal reimbursement.
So that standardization might be seen as enhancing efficiency.
Correct.
Is it typical to pay for the employee benefits and that type of thing when you're covering those responding agencies? It's typical to cover those?
Those are normally considered reimbursable expenses.
Okay, benefits and pension, all of that. Okay, and then do we have a designated person on the Alliance? Did you say, do we have a member on the Alliance, or is the city itself a member of the Alliance?
The city itself.
The city itself, not a person that represents that. Okay, and then what is if any, is there an annual cost to be part of this membership?
Not of this particular entity. We do have the city does have an annual expense being a member of the American Public Works Association, but this particular exercise within that organization does not change those costs at all.
Okay, the only cost incurred then is if you have an emergency and other agencies come to help, and then you pay their cost of what it took to get them to help you.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
And
I just noticed in the notes that it's based on a document that FEMA has encouraged. How much is FEMA involved, or is this happening because of the, we'll call it encouragement of FEMA, or is this something that?
Like we described earlier, we think the processes and procedures in here will make it easier and simpler to document in those cases where there's potential availability of reimbursement, FEMA or other federal agencies for emergency response. But this is not something that's necessarily being promoted by FEMA or anything else. I think they recognize it as probably being useful to communities, but they're not out soliciting or campaigning for communities.
Or they will be involved in administration, or?
No, they would be involved in the review of the paperwork associated with federal reimbursement in those cases where federal reimbursement is a possibility. And that's the only time that they would be involved.
other questions?
I did have a question. Now I'm trying to remember what. It was on page 9. I'm trying to pull up the document, but where it talks about this may be approved or executed as an executive function. And is there a reason why it needs to be passed on the council if it's something that can be handled by administration?
That's the process I will probably actually have to plead some degree of ignorance to. I'm not sure whether the council action is actually approving the document or authorizing the mayor to sign the document. I'm not sure from a procedural standpoint what the specific action of the council is. I think it was important to those involved that the council be aware of this and be supportive of it. But what this formal action that's being taken by the council is, I'm not.
Let's turn to Mr. Jones.
Article 19 is where it's at.
And I haven't seen the agreement before, but generally speaking, interlocal agreements need to be approved by the council. Check and see if there's.
It says this agreement may be approved and executed as an executive function in accordance with the provisions of the Utah Interlocal Cooperation Act, and the adoption of a resolution of approval is normally not required. That's what this says. But
We took the higher road on this one.
Yeah,
Just
just-
assumed it looked and talked and walked like an interlocal agreement.
okay,
So we
So that-
brought it to your focus.
okay, I appreciate that.
So we're simply agreeing to place this on the agenda for the council meeting 2 weeks hence. May I receive a motion to that effect? Mr. Sewell, a second? Mr. Winterton, all in favor? Thank you. It's approved unanimously. Thank you very much, Greg. Mr. Pepperoni, welcome. A discussion regarding a portion of the downtown master plan dealing specifically with historic preservation.
Josh Rose is going to come over to that. He's had to be up for the time, so I can probably have it just fine. We may let it jump to the next item.
Let's do.
You're right.
You bet. Thank you.
We're just flying through our agenda.
Bart's here.
Part Sanders is here.
Bart, welcome. We'll turn to you, please. For a discussion regarding an update of the water conservation plan.
Just giving a little history here for a moment. Looking back to approximately 1975, we had a pretty heavy runoff that year, a lot of snowfall and quite a year. And then following that, within a year or two later, it went the other way. And the system at that point, the water system, had 2 less water tanks than what council and administration have been helping us with now to increase our storage level. But at that time, there were 7 million gallons less of that. And 3 wells that we currently have were not drilled at the time. So when we got to the point of, we ended up in an emergency, is what the bottom line was. And I just reflected back, because a couple of years ago, I was cleaning out some keys out of my desk, and I came across this. And a few of our people were actually sworn in to where they could get tickets. Some of you may remember that at the time. And there were citations given for people who were wasting water. And that was back at that time. As things went on from that point, and the state started to more aggressively push having a water conservation program for each of the cities, we eventually got to the point, and by regulation, that we had to have a written water conservation program, which became part of our master plan. And a lot of things were required in there, and the hard part of this is that while we want to conserve, we have a strong system. And with that, we have enough sources that we can typically supply. And so while we don't want water wasted, it also, from my, I guess I'm mercenary, water is money, it's revenue for us. So those that use the water wisely, we'd like to be able to sell it. But on the other hand, we don't want to waste it. And so with that, if I can remember how I advanced this. Oh, I did it right. With that, there's a regulation that it has to be updated. That water conservation plan has to be updated every 5 years. Now we have that similar regulation on various other water portions of our operation, one of them being the wellhead protection plan. But this particular update has to be done every 5 years. So we completed that. Part of that update is that we have to have buy-in from the municipal council and have you accept that and adopt it. And in that, in some areas of it, there's not a lot of changes. Other areas, it brings us up to date, and we do have a few changes in that. One of them that is the big thing for us is the outdoor watering. And approximately 51% of our overall water production into our system goes outside, outdoor use, between industrial as well as going on the lawns. And so obviously that's a large portion of our water. And years ago, approximately 12 years ago, we did a feasibility study to see, well, okay, should we be looking at something else as far as the secondary system? The problem that we have is in that what was determined at the time was basically we have the same water that would be going into that system, and we need to come up with basically $175 to $180 million to be able to implement that. Just was outside the realm of anything that was a possibility. The other part of it is indoors. How do you encourage people to keep their plumbing? And a lot of it, when you look at it that way, by AWWA standards, typically 55 to 60 gallons per person per day is what would be utilized as an average across the United States. We're on indoor water use, we're about 113, which you'll see in the document copies you have. So we have some room for improvement, but what I was hoping to lead to with this was that in the time that I've been with Provo, something that I found was going back to when I talked about the tickets in the late 70s. We went to odd and even day watering. Your guess would be what? What would happen? Water use would go down, just the opposite. It backfired on us and went the other way. Because people were so concerned they weren't going to be able to get their lawns watered, they overwatered on the days they were allowed to. So hence, we found in Provo we were better off to ask, and we've had that a couple of times when we got into problems. We've asked for reductions. The citizens of Provo are incredible. They'll back off, and we're able to make it. So we haven't had to go to restrictions as such. Now, part of what the plan brought on, though, one of the major changes and the biggest one that I see is in our department, Public Works Department, and then specifically the Water Division, we ended up 5 years ago appointing a water conservation coordinator. And that individual is Laramie Gonzalez, which I'll ask Laramie to join me now, if you would, please. I'm going to have him give you his take a bit on where he's at. This is not the only duty that Laramie has either. You'll see him involved in a number of projects. Very, very talented. He moves things forward in a very professional manner. And he has some real challenges here that perhaps he'll share with you, some problems that he deals with some of our residents here and how we look at getting around it. Anyway, I'll turn the time to Laramie. What we're asking for here in the end is that the council adopt our updated water conservation plan so that we can stay within state regulations and be where we should be on this item.
As Bart noted, we have some unique circumstances here in Provo that at one time we did have. We've had some we've had some water shortages. As the city grows and we've developed more water sources and have more water available to us, I think it's a misconception by most of the public that because we see snow on the mountains and we see water in the river, that there's plenty of water and that it's cheap and that they don't have to pay so much attention to that until they're forced to do so. Across the country, that's not the case everywhere. We know, like in places like California and places like even Florida, you would think would be a water-stricken state. But they have measures in those states where sometimes they don't have a choice but to implement restrictions that it's even illegal not to have moisture meters for your sprinklers in Florida. It's some of those things that we don't think about here that make big differences that maybe not necessarily here we even notice, such as low flow toilets and low flow shower heads. And we get a number of calls, probably we get a couple a week, not maybe once a week now, but in the summertime I might get 2 or 3 or 4 people asking for those types of resources, if it makes a difference, how much it can save them, how much it saves them on And we can direct them to those places where they can get those things, like the toilets and shower heads and faucets and things like that. But when it comes down to it, I think it's mostly education. I don't think people understand that sometimes these little things make big differences. And on a much larger scale, we can look at some high rises like New York, where these larger cities they can have 1,000 residential units in one building. And switching out a low flow toilet that might save a gallon per flush in 1,000 units in one day, but they tend to flush the toilet twice in one day. There's 2,000 gallons a day that people save. It's hard for us to implement those kind of savings when that's one project can knock out that much water, I guess, add to their water efficiency. Where here, for us to implement 2,000 low flow toilets is a little more difficult. So some of those, I guess we call low-hanging fruit that you might see in other states. It's not so. It doesn't make as big a difference for us here. Bart also indicated a lot of water we use, I think it's 51%, is outdoor water use. A lot of other states don't have the outdoor water use that we have here, and we sometimes forget that we're in the desert. And I get calls all the time where the neighbor can't understand why their water bill's so high, and they're watering. It's kind of funny, even things in October, I had a resident come say their neighbor's still watering an hour in the morning and an hour at night. And well, the grass isn't dying, it's not dying. But the education that some of these residents lack is something that we need to target and make sure that they all understand that they have access to the education, have access to materials that we can provide them. We have outdoor watering tips, indoor watering tips, things like that we can make sure the residents understand how important this is to us. One important thing to note too, also in the conservation plan, if you'll notice, there's a table in there that shows our water needs, not only today, but at the field out in 2016. It shows the water, the needs that we're going to have in 2016, and the amount of water that we can produce. The amount of water we can produce without conservation efforts shows that we can come up short in a dry year. That if we don't meet the state's, I don't know if you mentioned this, the state's mandate in their Conservation Act, that we reduce our consumption to 25% by the year 2025. If we don't meet that goal, we could be short water. Fortunately for us, and if you got a chance to look at that, we've met that goal already. In 2011, I think was our lowest year yet. We was 191 gallons per capita, and I think we started at 2011 was our lowest year, 191. I think the next year we were at 222 or something. So we all know that water consumption has a lot to do with weather. So in a weather dry year, it can change. But for the most part, we're there and we're doing good. And we have a number of things that we're in the process of doing. And I think if we continue with this, continue with the market.
And the mark is 197? Is that what you?
The goal
under 197?
The goal is 208.
Oh, okay.
That's 25% off of our 2,000 waters.
Okay.
And I think now we're at 222. Last year was 222. The year before was 195. So.
I noticed in your plan that you talk about irrigation. You talk about new development and the requirement for them to show how they're going to irrigate their landscape. Is there a requirement to use secondary water if it's possible, if it's available, or is it just a suggestion to use secondary water?
And on that requirement that you're talking about, you read it, there will be with commercial developments and multi-unit housing. Residences, we haven't quite again got our arms around that, because as much as we are asking people to reduce, again, we found with residences to hammer down and make it you can only do this, you can do this, and you can do this, hasn't been as effective as requesting the help. And so there will be restrictions brought in, but we're also trying to, or implemented rather, but we're trying to make everything as reasonable as possible. And if people use the water in a reasonable way, then we're okay with the use.
Well, and not every building is going to be near a secondary water source, near a stream or near something where they can actually draw on that. But those that are near that and could use that are going to be encouraged to include that in their plan. Okay.
And the only thing we would not want, again, is if they don't interconnect the two systems. And we have a program coordinator that takes care of that. But for instance, you probably read through that as well, but BYU has converted a major portion of their operation, and that's made a big difference.
Yeah, and the parks, like 5 parks, right?
So in our parks department, used a couple of spots up the canyon. The South Fork Park, I'm sure you've been to, that one was on secondary water.
Great. So all the areas that can use secondary water, we're going to be trying to get them to use that. And what percentage of our city could be already, without putting in a secondary system and all that expense, what percentage of our city could actually access secondary water? Do you know that?
I don't have a figure on that, to be honest with you. And also, some of the private canals are still utilized heavily, and others are kind of going away a little bit. And a lot of people still on private canals have that option in various areas of the city that they can water that way. Our canal system on our dishwater is just so inefficient, and as development continues to increase, we step away from that. And so, and now we're using that water through the culinary system. We send it through Central Utah plant and bring it into the system. Now, the point that you're making on exactly where people can draw from, I really don't have a feel for that yet as to just how extensive that'll be.
And then probably water rights too. People certain.
There is.
That's probably a lot of it is owned by other entities rather than the city. Is that a fair statement? Yeah.
Some areas have river water that they can draw from, and they do on that. But the rivers, not everyone, the canals aren't everywhere. Some use private wells. That is happening as well, and we're encouraging that. As to a requirement, we don't have a requirement in place there yet. I'm not sure I can honestly say that that's where we're going. It's still going to be more of a, on the residential end, asking people to utilize that benefit if they have.
That's a good discussion to have, because not only encouraging them to do that, but previously, something you may recall is even our ordinance hasn't allowed in the past for them to do these types of zero-scape landscape. And recently, just a couple of years ago, we changed the park strip portion, but haven't really addressed the front yard design and stuff like that. So fighting off those small bits, I think is helpful significantly. But we're actually allowing them to do that, whereas previously turf grass was their own option. So.
Are you said about 170 million to create a new secondary system?
Because you've got to dig up every street. So what we have for culinary, you literally have to duplicate if you're going to go to secondary.
And are we, as we go forward, are we reducing that number in any way, or are we just saying that's so far out of reach that we can't deal with it?
To be honest with you, so far out of reach because of the point of sources of water to get them to, for instance. Now that's a very good point. It's addressed in that feasibility study, was that most of the area that was redeveloped on the west side that we will look at various development on. So how do we get it from where the source is to the west side? We've got the same thing again. We will also have to have people either put in pressure pumps to be able to pump their system, or if you're going to pressurize it, you've got to have an impoundment somewhere with enough difference in elevation to be able to take the water there. So it's literally like duplicating the culinary system. And part of it too that's addressed in that feasibility study, and some in the conservation plan, is that Provo is so unique in the pristine sources we have of groundwater, the springs and wells. All they needed to be chlorinated to be able to use for culinary purposes. Most other cities, to be honest with you, have to purchase the water from a treatment plant. So they're paying treatment costs as well as water right issues. That Provo in that way is water rich on rice, as we've discussed before. And it's the water is so pristine, it takes very little treatment to bring it into the system, with the exception of where we do take more surface water, and 5 to 6% everything is on that through Central Utah plant to be treated and then bring it in. So It's the uniqueness of the system that makes a difference on it.
Not just that, the source that would be required to fuel a secondary system.
Same sources we're using today.
Correct.
A question regarding that as we look at secondary to me doesn't seem, well, the distribution problem, but you've only got so much water, whether you run that water through a treatment plant and make it culinary water or just keep it out of the treatment plant and make it secondary, that the water capacity is still kind of the same, isn't it? I mean, by using secondary water, we're not gaining new water sources. We're just maybe saving the cost of the treatment.
I think that's correct.
So
The principal reason for a secondary system is to utilize lower quality water than you would utilize in less expensive water. In this case, where most of our water comes from streams or from wells, not wells, I'm sorry, springs and wells, the quality of the water really doesn't change very much. Yeah, so the high cost of the capital is nowhere near offset by this.
So where did BYU, what source did they use for their secondary?
Part of theirs on the Upper East Union. The Upper East Canal rights, that pressurized that with the Kent Canal, and then parts of that subsequently became the Upper East Union Canal, and it was in a perfect location to come down and supply BYU. And I have to commend BYU that they were ahead, they wanted to do that, and they jumped in. It's been a tremendous help. Now, not all of BYU is on that, but a large portion is in their fields, and it's been a tremendous help. So it becomes back to Kim's point of depends on where it is and whether or not you're close enough to be able to pick something up. That project costed a pretty penny, if you will, as well, but it was, once it was done, it's been a major advantage. Now, having said that, in almost every area, there's if you get over in the Hena Halls area, you'll see one kind of an unusual smaller building sitting there, and what's in that is a pumping system and the reduced pressure low principal backflow preventer and a connection up from our culinary system, because the secondary system, as great as it is not always available when they're wanting to use water. So in the early spring and late fall, they've still got to go back on the culinary system if they're still in a position to need the water.
I think you made a good point that there's not a whole lot of difference between the two sources of water. There's not either. The city I live in, a few years ago, put in a secondary system. And the first year, they just didn't have enough water to supply that system. They filled those ponds with culinary water for the first year that they able to utilize their irrigation system. It didn't seem kind of not worth it at the end of the day to the cost of.
Is that to the north of this?
Actually,
South.
So I have another question, but it's off that topic. Is it okay to switch to meters? I just had a question about the meters that we're changing and how you can identify leaks and do that a lot quicker and notify the household that has the leak and that type of thing. But we only have 6,000 installed, and we'll get 18,000 installed over the next 2 years. Is there a way to speed up that process so it's more efficient, quicker, or is that what we can do?
We chose to go that way mainly because of the money savings of being able to install them as we went along.
Okay.
Implement the program and get our repeaters in place to make sure they work, and we've been very successful in that, and it's moving forward.
Because we're not over the water we're not over the level, so we're able to keep it at that.
That's right. Now,
okay.
if we wanted to go ahead with and basically initiate more expense to get quicker, we could do that. But to be honest with you, it's pretty efficient the way we're going and identifying. The thing that has been very impressive is that system notifies you immediately with a flag if something's out of line. We pick up leaks, and we send a letter, by the way, and tell people, please check your household plumbing and your sprinkling systems because it indicates that you have a leak.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people call in, and others, you see them immediately, it stops. So they found, one of the most typical things that happens too is people will go out and shut their sprinkler system off in the fall going into winter. They'll drop the key on, turn in the half turn, they don't get it all the way. So it sits and it's blowing water out. And it's just a matter of tightening. Most of them will drop the key on and tighten it. Some do have the hard part of finding out they have a break in the system somewhere. And so it's greatly reducing the amount of water we are losing to those issues, and because of that, that's part of our substantial savings as well. Also, we've got an aggressive leak detection program. We've been closing off more and more leaks in the distribution system that way, and we'll continue to do so. We also have had an aggressive mainline replacement program for about 35 years that has moved us way forward from where most cities would be. I'm not trying to say we're better than everyone else, but we've actually done a lot more than most cities do as far as upgrading that infrastructure, which you end up with less leaks that way.
There's certain parts of the city that are less improved, can we say?
There are.
That are, okay, because.
Good point, there are.
Yeah.
Piece by piece is where it is, and we're kind of, you pick the one that you get the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, to get out, replace it,
Yeah.
and get it stopped. You know, some show up as mainline leaks, others are just little ones here and there, and corks blowing out, that kind of thing. And,
seems like in certain areas there are pockets of when one house has a leak. You know, we had a report that 22 homes in one area had leaks, and so I'm wondering, yeah, if that's infrastructure, that's just the need to replace.
That's how we've been targeting them as well. So
yeah.
If I'm answering your question the way I think you did it, we pick and choose where the place is that we seem to be having the most problems.
Okay.
And every year we come up with a list of mainline that we should concentrate on, and we prioritize those. Some of it's just because it's old, some of it's got a number of leaks, which is bad soil, and along with just keeping up with everything, just regular development, we pick off those top ones and start trying to be more proactive than reactive. And that's been a really big help in minimizing our large potential mainline leaks. We do have mainline leaks like any city, but they're not as catastrophic as they could be. So.
I probably need to find some wood to knock on right now. But getting through the Christmas holidays, we had multiple corporations inside. We had a couple of homes and businesses that they turned the heat off and went away, and when they came back and turned the heat back on, and it thaws out, lines break, and it starts to flood that way. So the distribution system, as of yet, we have not had mainline breaks. Be the type of issue we attribute that for the most part. Some is the weather issue, but most part the improvements we made on the system. Now we still have some lines that need to be replaced. To your point of the hands down, there are areas we're still working on the main line improvements.
And I appreciate your quick response too. Just personally, we've had some in our neighborhood that were just like, you're on it really quickly, and appreciate that. Yeah.
We tried really, really hard with that, and we try to help the customers as well. But this is a new arena for them when they have a disaster like that. They have to stop and think what would happen. Sometimes it's not self-induced; it just happens. Other times they haven't thought about it, and they knocked up the house warm enough. And boom, you get a broken line.
One thing I'd like to have your first question about the meters. I'm really excited about our CMI we're implementing, because over this summer is the first time I've really had a chance to get in there and look at the interface and look at those meters real time. And when somebody would call and say, "Oh, my neighbor's overwatering and I'm watering all day and I've got water running on my property," I've never been able to actually pull up their usage. And we've been able to pull up their usage and see what they're using for the month, but never, well, your screen on 9 o'clock last night because I saw a water spike, or it just completely went off till 2 in the morning. And 2 in the morning, there was another spike. I said, "Oh, wait a minute, we're not watering 2 in the morning." And we're starting to be able to give them feedback on what they're doing real time. Some people are a little skeptical, or a little. It's kind of a big brother issue. Like, do you really know when I'm taking a shower?
But the diagnostics are nice.
That we can tell. And what's kind of ironic about that is the people that are calling and complaining about their neighbors, I'm finding that they're using just as much water, if not more. And so it seems like with one phone call complaining about their neighbor, we're able to solve 3 or 4 or 5 problems in that neighborhood. And I think that probably happened a couple of times this summer. And we haven't got those meters installed everywhere in the city, but it's been a good use of tool. And I'd encourage you, if you notice that you've got a little less system, you're able to also. we can take a look at what you're doing. Sometimes you might even not even know your sprinklers are coming on.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Gentlemen, an excellent report. Thank you. This item will reappear on our agenda this evening. Now to the discussion of the portion of the downtown master plan dealing specifically with historic preservation.
One of the primary policy realm recommendations in the downtown master plan section dealing with historic resources is dealing with the boundary of what we call the downtown historic district. The downtown historic district was established by ordinance not long after the establishment of the Landmarks Commission and our Landmarks Preservation Ordinance. It was drafted and codified in a way that geographically was coincident with the National Register Historic District that was established in 1980. Typically, National Register districts, in order to maximize the possibility of adoption and actual registration, are drawn narrowly in order to maximize the ratio of contributing to non-contributing structures in the district, both in terms of absolute numbers of structures and of density of structures for a certain geographic area. And the downtown, Provo Downtown Historic District was drawn in such a way as if you have a copy, you're able to look at that section of the master plan. I could have
Good.
That the district is actually drawn very narrowly along even the back sides of buildings through the middle of blocks to maximize the number of historic structures within a certain area. And while that serves very well for the honorary functions of downtown of a National Register district, it has turned out to be, and the analysis that we conducted as a part of the downtown master plan process, it appears that it may not be as effective. It's in council meeting or council document folder. Scroll all the way down. 2015-16. There you go. So this will show you the map from the master plan. In practice, what this has really led to, as the Landmarks Commission and staff have gone about their mandate of reviewing any building or new construction, demolition, or alterations that take place within the downtown historic district, it's limited the purview to almost an artificially small area where it's cutting in the middle of the blocks or isn't considering adjacent block faces. So, for example, the corner here of Center and University, we could probably say that it has the most concentration of historic buildings, with the night block over here, and then the commercial bank building here with the dual towers, the temple and the courthouse, and then historic buildings running north on the west side of Center Street. Right in the middle of the block, those properties adjoining University on the north half of the block are not in the district and are not subject to design review through the landmarks process. And so it removes an opportunity to consider the sensitivity and the contextuality of buildings that are definitely affecting the integrity and the setting of buildings in the district and the district as a whole. So what we've proposed as an element to implement this section of the downtown master plan would be to expand in some manner, whether limited to review of new construction, or expanded to include the same protections for some of the buildings that would fall within the expanded area that would be eligible for designation of protection in districts, some of the historic buildings. That along that range, we think and would recommend that the district be expanded in some fashion to include the blocks and block faces adjacent to the historic district. This map is not a specific recommendation, but is basically indicating that within that 10-block area, that's probably an appropriate area within which to delineate a final boundary, so that we can protect the edges of the district that have as much impact on its integrity and setting as an adjoining block face that happens to be within the district. So that, just for reference, that expanded area would take, or this map, this line is showing 100 north to 100 east, down to 100 south, to 300 west, to 400 west, and then back up to 100 north, basically squaring off the district.
This is one of the cases in the downtown plan where this really is a new policy, and that's why we're bringing it to pointing it out.
Have you run it by those businesses that would be included? How do they feel about it being included in this, and would they have benefits like the CDBG money for facade type thing, or is that something we would decide?
Well, right now, this wouldn't expand the eligible area for those CDBG funds. That area would actually still be larger than this. That goes to 500 west.
Oh, okay.
So that CDBG area for facade grants is already larger than the district.
Okay.
It goes to 100 north on University, and then 500 west to 100 east.
So they're just going to be required, if we do this, to go through the design review committee for any new construction? Is that what you're saying?
It would depend on the policies we adopt for what you could call a periphery district. You could either take that existing boundary and just move it, expand it, and apply all the same regulations that are currently applied to the downtown historic district, including review of new construction, different protections for what we would call significant contributing and non-contributing buildings. There are some buildings in that expanded area that would probably be classified as significant and contributing, and would be protected under if the current regulations in the zone in the area were expanded. Or it could merely be a peripheral area where new construction is reviewed for its appropriateness in its context adjacent to the main historic area.
Review would be by the Landmarks Committee, not the design review.
Correct.
Okay.
Most large projects are reviewed do go through some type of design review, but not necessarily from a landmark standpoint.
Okay.
Ms. Santiago's question still stands, though. What plan do you have to duly inform all of the property owners in the expanded area?
I think based on the response from the council and the feeling about this proposal as a policy, if we do decide to move forward with that, we would definitely implement an outreach program to both inform and seek feedback about the response and the feelings about this. A lot of the property that is would be included is already partially included. City property, a large amount of the north side of blocks are often contiguous with the Center Street side of blocks. So there's a lot of property owners who are already involved in that in some ways with some of their properties. But I think we'd go through a standard involvement process that we would typically do in implementing something like this to provide information and solicit feedback and work through any issues that may come out of that.
Do you have a timeline for a proposal?
If this is adopted within the downtown master plan, then after the adoption of the downtown master plan, I would assume that as community development staff, we would move forward in collaboration with the Landmarks Commission to start developing a specific proposal within a number of months, and hopefully within the year after the adoption of the downtown master plan, be able to complete that process.
Is there anyone in that group that is part of a stakeholder group that's helped you to develop this downtown plan? Who's all involved in this group that, like as far as neighbors, or do you have someone in this area that's helped develop this plan, or do you have a stakeholder group? I guess I should ask.
Up to this point, no, we haven't.
You don't have a stakeholder group. Okay.
Worked specifically with the community to develop those recommendations at this point.
For the entire downtown plan.
Right.
Okay.
How does redevelopment agency feel about this? Is this going to be a hindrance to redevelopment? Should we expand that area? And I just wonder, would it also be a hindrance to it? Would it have been a hindrance to us in taking down the rusted artichoke building because of we needed safety? We did that for safety reasons. Would this new be a hindrance to that?
There's two-part answer. One, the protection of buildings within the district is based on their designation. All of the structures within the existing district are designated either significant, contributing, or non-contributory. There are varying degrees of protection and restrictions on the demolition of those buildings, but one of the prime exceptions to those, and quick exceptions to those policies, and it's pretty much generally across the board, is a chief building official is deemed a structure to be an imminent hazard to safety and welfare, that is one of the reasons that even a significant structure, which typically could not be torn down, could be removed for safety reasons. So in that case, it may have led to some additional discussions as to whether the money to which direction that money may have been spent in to a best result. Other maybe mitigating it in some other way to retain the building, but if the decision was to remove the building, it wouldn't have been a hindrance to that. And in response to concerns about the district hindering development, I would say that if we can build the innovation center in the historic district, the New Skin Innovation Center, we can probably build anything.
And that would be my next question. How easy would it be to duplicate the Innovation Center?
The Innovation Center was constructed under the current landmarks ordinance.
Okay.
I feel, and I've felt from most of the members that I've had an opportunity to serve on the Landmarks Commission, that the commission has been mostly desirous to see authentic architecture of today than to preserve some stylistic element of the past. I don't think we're Park City where we want everything to look like a mining town from 1998. I don't see us running an art museum out of town because it was new and contemporary. So I think we've been very, from the landmark side, very forward-thinking in appreciating the best architecture from today as enhancing the best architecture that we preserved from the past.
Thank you.
Hear, hear. My question about timetable was actually, and I apologize for the ambiguity, directed to the presentation of the downtown master plan. Is that something that is on the horizon?
It's scheduled for our next meeting.
Oh, well, speak of that.
I do have a question. So for other neighborhood plans, we've had a stakeholder group of input and lots of input, and they've worked on this together. They kind of own it. Right. And I worry about this, not having input from stakeholders, like at least neighborhood chairs and maybe Mike Bonomo, and having some of these businesses represented, because we're creating a plan for them and they don't know about it, or they haven't been part of the process. And so I think they should be brought in to look at it, evaluate it, and then give feedback before we ever weigh in on it. Is my own personal feeling. They should have the opportunity to address some of these things and say, kind of how they feel about what is presented.
Quite extensively with Downtown Provo Inc. In using their network to get this in front of their members and their stakeholders. Okay. Primarily with Jared Morgan. Okay. That Jared was very much involved in helping us repackage this kind of extensive document into a smaller kind of marketing collateral as to here's what we've done, here's the goals, here's a short pamphlet that you can get up to speed on this.
So you think most of the businesses are informed? They've seen it, they know
I think
about it.
most people are aware of the process and have seen the product at one point, but there's been kind of a lag between the time that we've completed this. This plan was almost finished, drafted before we even started the Joaquin plan. So it's kind of been in a long review and holding pattern for a while. So it may have not been recently. There may not be a lot of awareness of it right now because it had been on the back burner for like a year.
Yeah. What I worry about is being in a meeting, a council meeting, and having all the neighborhoods come and say, hey, wait a second, there's this plan, we're just finding out about it. And so if there's a way we can reach out to them and show them and let them, I don't know if you can weigh on that.
I think it's been pretty publicly acknowledged and distributed amongst.
We presented it in the neighborhood share council. Is that what you call it? They all come together. We presented it in one of those.
Well, this has been on a work set. The downtown master plan has already been discussed in work session. It's in November, and should have already been on your council meeting agenda for approval. We delayed that because community development wanted to ensure that you had this discussion around the historic preservation element. My sense is that most of the neighborhoods, or at least the more active participants in the neighborhood surrounding the downtown, are aware of this plan. I've looked at it. That's been my impression.
And they're part of it. They like it.
Even if there hasn't been a formal outreach. But if it would help,
plans surrounding it.
I think what we could do, because I think it's already, I'll have to double check with Louise if it's been publicly noticed. I think we've publicly noticed already for the next meeting, but certainly you could always continue it. But we could also just put out one final call for input through our social media channels and also the cities, to see if there's people we missed. And they still have one final opportunity to weigh in at that public meeting, and then if there's major concerns, you could always continue it.
And we can get it back to downtown Provo Inc., back to Mike
Bill.
One more time as well.
Bill has a finger.
One of the things we have found through this process, the electing process, is that we get the draft plan out there, we go through our steps of trying to seek that input, and we don't get much feedback until we schedule the meetings, until it's on a planning commission agenda. We just have a really hard time getting people to go to it and read it and start giving us feedback. So that's why this document's language, as long as we've had it out there on our internet sites and have been seeking it for months and months and months. But I'd rather measure twice and cut once. So if you think that we should get some more input like Matt has described, that's fine.
Well, let's see what happens at the next meeting.
We'll put out a concerted effort in the next week to make sure that people are aware that you'll
be good to do one last push and kind of just let them know that it's coming up to the council, and we're going to be, could make a decision on it, and that if they would like to make sure they've seen it, and if they have any comments, they can make those.
Josh,
Mr. Holmes.
How does this affect vacant ground within the area? Just has that review, that 360 review, that what's adjacent to it, or how would that play out?
Vacant ground that's currently in the district? Or
yes, vacant ground that's currently in the district. So across the street, or say some other vacant property in the downtown that we're going to develop, what would be the process?
It really would not be entirely different than the process it would see today, except for its schedule, its hearing before design review committee would instead be a hearing before the Landmarks Commission, and that staff report would would include more focus on the Secretary of the Interior's standard for the treatment of historic properties, and a little more sensitivity to that property's impact on adjacent, or that developed property's development impact on adjacent historic buildings, but not substantially different.
It strikes me that the issue is largely one of approving the enlarged area, at the same time noting that there's still much to come in terms of how it will be treated.
Right.
Yeah, I think this stage of should you adopt the master plan, this is giving an indicator of a direction the councils would consider moving in, does not finalize any actions.
Take a formal proposal and a change to the ordinance to implement.
I have several questions about the plan itself that don't aren't directly related to the historic district. So do you want to hear them, or should we wait till
Would you
next
take those
meeting
up? Would you take those up in the meantime with
with
planning
them? Okay.
department?
Okay. Yeah.
Please. Thank you. Now to Mr. Bowles regarding an update on the Economic Development Strategic Plan. Welcome to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to come up and talk to you today about it. Just as a point of introduction, my name is Scott Bowles. I joined Economic Development back in September, and one of my duties is now to take control of the Economic Development Strategic Plan Steering Committee. So I just wanted to...
And one of my newest neighbors.
Yes. So to start off, we added a few more members to the committee. The document that Avalanche Consulting gave to us suggested that we have a certain number of committee members, which we did not have. And it appears that there was a loss of translation, that some members were invited verbally but never formally. So we extended those out, and we added Ron Ralph, Linda Middleton, Ray Morgan, and Cameron Martin, who respectively represent the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce, the Walton Group, Provo School District, and also Utah Valley University. So some very good interest coming here. And this is the committee as it now stands with all those members. So we have a wide selection of people that are representing this committee, from corporations to nonprofits, educational institutions. It's a very diverse group. And I didn't want to sit here and talk about piece by piece. The strategic plan is very long. It can be considered very wordy. So I just wanted to just quickly show through the newspaper, we see a lot of positive press coming about Provo. Sometimes negative press. 2014 was a good year. And there's a lot of things in the paper that people maybe didn't realize actually coincided directly with the results of the strategic plan. Here's some of them. Still going. So all of these articles that you're seeing from papers here in Utah, each one of these related directly to something that is in the strategic plan for economic development, whether it relates to business attraction or infrastructure improvements or helping to increase the entrepreneurial environment in Provo. This city, both administratively and legislatively, is pushing forward the recommendations of the strategic plan. And something that we'd like to talk about, we'd like to take a couple very notable highlights. And I'm going to steal Nathan Murray a little bit for a minute, come up and explain to you about 1 million cups, because there are 6 overall arching goals. And goal number 2 is make Provo a vibrant hub for entrepreneurs and innovation. So I wanted Nathan Murray to come up and talk about 1 million cups.
So every Wednesday at 9 a.m. at the Startup Building, we host an event that's a weekly educational event for business and entrepreneurship, intended to increase that vibrancy. So the gap that was filling was this kind of frequent event where entrepreneurs can come together, connect, and we showcase 2 new startups each week, talk about their business, and then there's usually a group of about 60 to 70 people. They're there to kind of vet out ideas, challenge them, push them a little bit. Encourage you to come. It's an event that happens at about 30 locations throughout the United States every Wednesday at 9. We're glad to be part of it. Our event's grown from about 20 people that first week in January of 2014 to about 70 at the end of the year. We've discussed everything from dating apps to 3D printers, just some other remarkable business. So come if you can. We'd love to have you tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Nate.
I mentioned a couple of our startups are demonstrating as we speak at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
So that's just one of the ways that this plan that's outlined things that we can do as a community to help increase the economic environment. That's just one small thing that's making a huge effect for Provo. Another thing that was done this year was the purchase and preservation of Rock Canyon. That fit perfectly within Goal 5, which was Provo offers a healthy, safe, and amenity-rich environment for families and businesses. And I think Mayor Curtis said it just right. He said, 50, 70 years from now, we'll be tearing down the rec center. It's a beautiful facility now, but we will still enjoy Rock Canyon and its natural beauty, and generations will look back at that decision and say that that was a great decision for this community. And so that was definitely a win for the city, for the people, for the region, and for this plan. And also, the groundbreaking for the West Side Connector, one of the most lofty and difficult goals is to ensure that Provo has infrastructure in place to support growth. Infrastructure is expensive. It takes a long time to plan. And the strategic plan lines out various types of towards roads, or like we were just talking about, sewer and water infrastructure, ensuring that we have adequate water for future growth is something I'll be looking at. But looking ahead at 2015, we held a couple of meetings in this last quarter of 2014 with the strategic planning committee and said, what do you want to do? We didn't want the committee to be just kind of a rubber stamp committee and say, okay, economic development's going to sit together, here's what we like, so just tell us that we're doing a good job. As you saw beforehand, we've got a committee with lots of different opinions. And when we sit down together as a group, the conversations are very interesting. We have lots of different viewpoints, lots of different intersecting ideas, and we always come away with very good suggestions. And so we sat down and said, let's look at all the goals, what do we want to do? And overarching, they really want to look at strengthening Provo, our economic development marketing message, both regionally and nationally. Getting that message of what they called why Provo. And that was a theme that they kept coming back. Why would a business want to come? And we said, well, let's explore that in 2015. Let's start looking at methods that we can engage in to increase our message of why Provo. And they also wanted to look at increasing partnerships with both BYU and UVU to increase participation in our local economic development environment, expanding it beyond what we have right now. I mean, from the BYU Composites program and the Mechanical Engineering Department, the UVU's aviation, we get calls and people interested all the time about these programs, wanting to know more information about how the business is going directly with partnerships with them. We also talk a lot about East Bay, and I know East Bay is something on the minds of citizens and also City Hall. And we had a great conversation with Scott Hansen, who is the general manager of the Provo Town Center, and also Mike Bomono, who is part of Downtown Provo Inc. And Mike Bomono sat across from Scott Hansen and said, Scott, why can't the mall be part of downtown? There's just a few blocks that separate us. So why can't we start making the arguments that this is downtown? And so we said, well, let's work to connect both downtown Provo and East Bay. Encourage commerce in this very clearly that are in that strategic plan. And lastly, the last goal that we had is this was actually the very first goal that the strategic plan outlines. And it's to vet the establishment of a Utah Valley Economic Development Corporation. And that got a lot of mixed reviews from the committee. Because if you look just in this area, you have Mountain Land Association of Governments. You have Provo Economic Development, Orem Economic Development, lots of chambers of commerce. You've got all these economic development organizations. Like, well, why should we create a whole different organization just to throw them into the mix? And it's not really about the intent of creating an organization. It's the intent of addressing overlap and gaps so we can become more efficient. And is it very possible that we vet this idea out and it says there's actually need for this? It is possible. But the consultants at Avalanche Consulting said this is something that needs to be encouraged, because as opposed to a chamber of commerce or a regular economic development organization, we look at a development corporation who is interested strictly in attracting business to an area and encouraging regional job growth, not just city specific. And council, that is my update for you today, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Are you acquainted with the startups that Wayne referred to that are now presenting, he said, even as we meet at the convention in Las Vegas? Would you care to say more about that?
Well, let me mention one, which is a technology that came out of BYU called Owlet. I don't know if you're acquainted with this, but this is the Bluetooth-enabled baby booty, which monitors oxygen absorption and temperature and pulse rate. And so for babies that may be particularly susceptible to SIDS, they now have this device which can be put on the baby's foot and can be monitored in real time through a cell phone app. And it will sound an alarm if a baby's oxygen absorption drops below a certain level or pulse rate drops below a certain level, and it's intended to prevent SIDS kind of events. It's one of those that's kind of taken the CES by storm. Heard several reports about it. And they're again, a Provo-centered business, came out of actually the Center for Entrepreneurship at BYU. And so that's one I know that presented today and has gotten some really positive reviews around the country.
They took up office space in downtown too when they started to grow. So I guess that's what we're trying to capture. Just,
the name again?
It's called Owlet, AOWLET.
I had a question about retail strategies.
Yes.
And they're going to be wrapping up mid-January.
We're still hoping for a phone call for them this week to discuss their findings.
Okay.
We had the holiday 2-week buffer period kind of messed up our schedule initially, but we're still hoping for a phone call this week. And before the holiday break, we were informed that by the end of January, they hope to have an initial report done for us.
Okay. Any sneak peeks from that?
That's what we're hoping for.
Just this week?
In retail studies, I know you are kind of constrained by who you're dealing with. And I wondered if you had a priority or if your priorities are based mainly on where interest comes from outside retailers or entrepreneurs. Or do you have a priority that you actually say, this is where we are focusing, and maybe not listen quite so much to the retailers or the entrepreneurs? Have you got a priority? I guess is the question.
Well, that sounds coy, but my priority is Provo. That will always be my priority. For the dad, I hope it will be my priority. Now, responsible business will always have our best interest at heart. Well, they always will. But I think I can speak for Dixon and Nate when I say that our purpose at economic development is to ensure that we retain as much of our local business as possible, like with 1 million cups, we foster that growth, that we market ourselves well, we encourage a healthy sales tax base, that we also present the most clear and transparent and informative information to you so you can make the best policy decisions possible. So when we go to our neighbors, we can say that we have a healthy business environment, that what people would say business friendly, that when it comes down to brass tacks and development agreements, that we're a good place to work with and encourage business. But when it comes to the strategic plan and the steering committee, and when it comes to this retail strategy, two very different groups. Working with the steering committee in an environment like this, where we're a city government, it's a lot different than, and I was speaking with Dixon about this today. Whereas you had, if we were a chamber of commerce and we were having active board, it's a lot easier. It integrates right into an agenda. But this one, it's kind of like its own separate agenda. And we're not picking and choosing what we want. We look at what's the low-hanging fruit as of right now, and what can we work towards. And as we move towards something, the environment can change, both internally or externally. And how do we respond to that? It keeps us on track. But from a retail strategy, it's a dichotomy of sorts. We have our preconceived notions of what makes Provo great, but an independent third party may come in and say, yes, we will validate what you think about this, but we're going to come down pretty hard and say that you're wrong about And we feel that retailers want this. And Councilmember, I think the core of what you were getting at, it's when we had that disagreements with the city, and when we have a consultant that comes and says, you feel strongly about this, but we feel the markets feel strongly this way. That's when we sit down and say, do we want what the market wants, or do we want what the program wants? And that's where we have our discussions and we make judgments.
So Gary, if I give you an example today, I had a phone call from got a phone call from a group who wanted to invite us to Florida for a conference to bring in a bunch of telemarketers, call centers. You know, if you're interested in Provo, we'll be happy to talk with you, but that's not a group that we primarily go after on a regular basis. And one of the things that, one of the businesses that came to Utah Valley or Provo this year was Frontier Communication. They've taken a lot of space down at the Novell, the East Bay Technology Park. They're a great business, but we did not go after them. They came to us, and we worked with them, and we were glad to have them in our community. So that's the kind of thing where this strategic plan on the economic development citywide strategic plan, those are giving us priorities, and frankly, call centers or customer service centers are not a priority, but we're not going to turn them away. But if they're working with us and it's good for us, we'll work with them. If it's something that's going to pay $7, $8 an hour, not going to turn them away, but probably not going to roll out the red carpet. As far as other strategies or priorities relative to retail, probably the number one thing that we are trying to work on right now, we're trying to solve is backfilling Kmart. What makes the most sense to go in that? Frankly, unfortunately, the brokers want to parcel it up into 4 different pieces and have smaller uses in that. To us, that's kind of the worst thing that could happen. So we'd like to see something different. We've talked to other brokers, we've talked to the property owner, we've talked to other potential end users. That right now is one of our top priorities, but as you can imagine, a 90,000 square foot vacant space, there's not a lot of users that can step into that and be there long term, and so those are the things that we're trying to position ourselves, and it's a fairly limited group. And Provo is not a top shelf market. So based on the reality of what we have, that's what we're trying to work towards.
I appreciate that. And I guess that's it, you nailed it. What is our reality and what are we dealing with?
Yep. Great. And then that's what will come out of the strategic plan for the retail strategies is, given our current situation, what can we realistically do to make a change there that would move the needle?
Are we looking at former, so I guess we've had at least 3 other firms come in over the past years who have given recommendations. Have we looked at those recommendations to see what they recommended and how things have changed, or if there's anything we can glean from that? Or would we compare that to what information we get from retail strategies? Their benefit in looking. So
you mean the 3 other firms that proposed for Provo City?
That have done, no, the 3 that have done something similar to what retail strategies is doing for us. Is there any benefit in going back and looking at what they...
Yeah, there would be.
And then comparing and kind of seeing where we can...
So at some point we'll leave the consultants and say thanks, and then we'll start working directly with brokers and or end users. But yes, there's absolutely benefit in looking at and seeing if there's something that we missed or something that's new that we should be considering. Absolutely.
I think several of those groups, Councilmember Santiago, came in really, and they were brought in really to focus on downtown. Retail, and again, the retail strategies effort is much broader and is citywide, and focuses on a different type of retail. I think it would be, what's really interesting to me is to go back and watch that video from Randall Mackley, who said what you really need to do is bring restaurants and specialty boutique retail into your downtown. And guess what's happened? We've done exactly that. If you go back and look at what Chris Lineberger suggested in terms of transit-oriented development,
housing,
trying to do housing around the transit station, it's exactly what we've done. And so I know we often hear the frustration that all you guys ever do is go get consultants. And at the end of the day, the answer is we listen to them. Yeah, and we strategize, we develop downtown master plans, and we come up with marketing strategies that reflect that. And it would be really interesting to me to have Lineberger and Randall Mackley come back now 5 years later and take a look and see what we've done. I think they would feel absolutely vindicated.
The sentiment you expressed about Provo, is it something you you have acquired since moving into Matt's neighborhood?
No, I had
He said he was never going to move again.
no, never
So-
again, ever. No, and interestingly enough, I had a friend of mine that was an acquaintance that went to school at BYU and told me I moved into Franklin neighborhood. And he looked at me and said, pretty rough area, and I was like, man, you need to expand your world view a little bit. You think that's a rough area? No, it's just personally, I went to school at BYU a long time ago and approached this love. Honored to be back.
Franklin 20 years ago.
Splendid.
A little bit.
Splendid. Well, thank you for this update and for your weekly updates. We are much obliged to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker, items from the mayor.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one today, and that is to just do a quick report. You'll recall in December, we had a work session meeting where we talked about the report from the Council's Budget Committee relative to user fees, and I just wanted to kind of let you know where we stood with that project. We had met with the Budget Committee subsequent to the Council work session and brought a couple of examples of some of the level of detail work we were trying to get through on some of these user fees that we had identified. We've done a fair amount of work. We have a fair amount more to do. And based on that discussion with the Budget Committee, Council staff opted not to put the user fees on the agenda for today, but to put them on in 2 weeks. We think we'll have a pretty complete list of the 8 that we identified. We think we'll have data on all 8. We'll have completed really a pretty good thorough review on probably 6 or 7 of those 8. And so it's a little bit of a work in progress, but we did want you to know we had worked diligently over the holidays and continue to work. We're finding some interesting data. We shared one preliminary piece of data with the Budget Committee and found a wide variety of opinion among members of the committee as to what would be the appropriate course of action based on that data. And we think that's probably what you'll see probably in all 8 of these scenarios. And so, but we just wanted you to know we were continuing to work, and it wasn't an oversight on our part to not be reporting to you today. So we will be much more fully prepared to go into much greater depth in 2 weeks. So.
We will look forward to that.
In the Budget Committee, we had talked about having you report to the Budget Committee before.
Yes.
And is there a meeting time that you might be able to do that?
Yeah, there is a meeting scheduled next
Thursday.
Thursday.
We have one Thursday.
This coming Thursday. Yeah, I think
Will you be prepared for that?
Yeah,
for this
we'll
week?
have some additional data for Thursday. We are planning.
You are planning that, okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, I recall those 8 were selected to be representative.
They were designed to hit a broad spectrum of different kinds of fees and different kinds of departments. And again, it intended to be a little bit of an experiment to see how, number one, how difficult it was, how much we would get, and then basically where the Senate would lie in terms of making adjustments. And so yeah, we'll be moving forward significantly and be ready for you on the 20th.
Splendid. Thank you. To Sean Allen for discussion of Gardner and Associates' request for a zoning change of approximately 35 acres from A15 agricultural to R18 single-family residential for a future subdivision development located at approximately 680 West, 1560 South in the Lakewood neighborhood.
Hello. So the subject property today is proposed for rezone. It's the old radio tower property, just south of 1560 South and West Freeway. It's been a topic of discussion for subdivision for probably over a decade, and so it's being revisited again. The general plan that was approved for this was back in 2002. And they approved it to a very low density residential with the caveat that we don't go above 4 units to the acre. It's higher area. The applicant is Gardner and Associates. We could go ahead and move slide. They're proposing R18 because we've got that to the east and somewhat compatible to the north. However, we've got lots of farmland out to the west. that's opposite from the dikes that border this property. For that reason, the application came in at a time where we've decided as a staff to explore this southwest region and establish some new goals and policies for the area. And we started with the neighborhood chairs and having a steering committee and going over what everybody wanted for the area. In the meantime, Gardner and Associates was patient and sat back and waited for those recommendations to sort of take shape. Basically, in a nutshell, residential for this property is sort of a no-brainer. We don't see any other best use for this property. It just comes down to lot size and density. The neighbors have complained about that. They want bigger lots, of course. But as we've gone through some of our meetings, they've kind of stepped back and realized that, well, we have smaller lots too. And so maybe we need to kind of meet in the middle. And what the applicant has proposed, if we can go ahead and move to the next slide. This is just the general plan designation, so go ahead and continue. Go ahead and continue again. The property is broken down into 114 lots, and that comes out to just over 3 units to the acre. So it's well underneath our maximum that we allow. The thing that I like about it is it's not all R18 size lots. We have only about half that are just over 8,000 square feet in size. The rest are 9,010 all the way on up to one that is 14,000 square feet in size. So we do have a range, which is what we were hoping to get. And the main thing that staff wanted to see, as well as the neighborhood and our steering committee, the Southwest, is open space. We wanted to see that we could get some sort of amenity to go along with additional housetops that would not just be standalone, but would someday hopefully connect to other open spaces that would then interconnect throughout the whole area and have connectivity through the whole region. That's our ultimate goal as a staff, and what will be our ultimate recommendation that come forward. And Gardner and Associates has agreed to preserve the dike areas for that open space. It's about 40 feet in width on either side, and the beauty of it is it would connect down here to some state property that we hope we could do some transfer of rights to, and then we could connect that down to the new road, and that intersection connects to the South Trail, or the trail, I mean, on the south side of the road.
What's the distance there, by the way, Sean?
Which distance?
The distance south to the connector.
It's a good question. It's probably
less than a quarter mile.
Less than a quarter mile.
Yeah. We go back to the aerial map.
It's less than the length of that piece there.
It's shorter than the property.
Yeah, it's shorter than the property.
500,000 feet max.
The Parks Division has come on board with this proposal, and we've asked them to work with the applicant to design the open space. We were concerned that if it was left to an HOA, and we had separate HOAs throughout the area, that the open space would suffer. And so we're hoping that Parks could absorb, and they've agreed to do that to date. And it's based on their ability to talk with the applicant, work with a design that also works for Parks. And there would be a 10-foot wide asphalt trail that would snake through that area, and then it would be mostly natural vegetation with lots of trees. So minimal ground landscaping, requiring minimal water. So that's where we're at with that, and they've agreed to work with the applicant. The Planning Commission heard this on November 12th and recommended an approval with some conditions, one of which was to form a development agreement that would ensure that this open space would go in and be designed appropriately. I personally don't feel like a development agreement is necessary to accomplish that. I think we can accomplish it through the site plan and the CRC approval process. And, you know, if the council does come to you, if you wanted to make that a condition on that, fine. But we're feeling really good about this. We're good about the density, again, the range of lots, sizes, and we think that we have a good developer that can follow through with their plans. One other item to note is if they do get approved and they go forward with the plans, they only plan to start with this bottom third of the area's phase 1. And it works out kind of nicely because it gives time for the connection of 5th West, which has been a concern of the neighborhood, to alleviate the traffic. And so once they're ready to put in phase 2, that new road should be ready to go.
Could we see the plat once more?
Sure.
Please.
Back one.
And so when you say the bottom third,
yeah, so we get this road, and then it would stop somewhere in this region. And Dave is here.
Yeah,
he could.
When you invite him
if
to speak,
he's more comfortable with where that line is, I'll let him share that. But I think it helps if we break this down over time. If it develops over time, I think it helps with that traffic issue.
and 3 phases is what you mentioned, or what they have mentioned.
3, it sounds like. 4. 3. 3, okay. On the public works side, we're going to make them put an easement for a sewer connection right through this area in case this west property develops in the near future. If it doesn't, it's okay, but we're trying to think ahead. So, any questions?
Mr. Van Buren.
As we plan for green space and make use of it, how does this particular development make use of the green space that they're providing? And how's the access or the use of it apply to this? Or is it more of a general green space requirement for the development?
Right now, it's just a general requirement. They haven't actually got a design yet for it, but we would have to have some sort of access for the lots that are in question. Path or trails.
Mr. Winterton.
Will the developer build the lots all, or will the lots be for sale subject to a development CC&Rs or something like that?
I'll let him answer that question. My feeling is that they want to avoid doing an HOA for the subdivision. So right now it's just a standard subdivision.
Where they would build, the developer would build and not necessarily sell lots.
No, he would sell.
Sell. You know, you mean sell a property, but he would sell unimproved lots. No, not unimproved lots. Unbuilt lots. Yeah. They are sell improved lots. Would he sell improved lots? That's the word I'm looking for.
And that makes sense.
And not homes.
There's not lots for the
Can I
house.
speak?
Sure.
Yes, please do. Please come forward if you will.
If you could say, can you just state your name for the recording, please?
My name is Dave Gardner. Our proposal is that we would joint venture with the builder, maybe more than one, and we would be selling the houses. So we'd work with the builder to pick the right lots, the right house for the right lot, because there are various sizes. We'd have some that would be bigger and some that would be smaller. And so we're not selling paper lots, we're not selling improved lots. We're working, but we don't build, we're not builders. So we partner with the builder to get the houses built. And our first phase actually does go all the way up to goes all the way up to 1560 and comes down, kind of zigzags in here. So the third is lengthwise, not this way.
On the east.
Yeah, so we tie into these two roads. We tie into 1460. And then the next one, it kind of goes over this way. Then the last one is just stop. We have committed to the neighbors, we'll tear down the radio station and the towers in the first phase, even though the radio station is ugly.
So Dave, on that phasing, there will be a variety of lot sizes on each phase in.
Yeah,
Like the first
yeah,
phase
they're
is
kind of
just
scattered up.
small
We haven't,
ones.
we haven't separated the large ones out from the small ones. They're all kind of integrated in there. So each phase will have a variety of lot sizes.
Have you thought further about the trail system?
Yeah, we've agreed to dedicate the property to Provo City and put it in the trail. And what we didn't want to have to do was form an HOA that would maintain the trail. An HOA in a subdivision type setting creates all kinds of headaches. They work well and when you've got townhomes or something other than a subdivision.
Other questions?
I guess one more, and this has, I'm doing this for a constituent that asked me about that West Side connector going through, and they're gonna say, why did we not take advantage of some development opportunities for retail and commercial through that area? And I've already told them that we're already too close to residential to really do that, and access off that street is challenging. That way, community development feels about.
Go back there, no, we're planning on some.
Can go actually to the last slide.
Business development. Dixon, why don't you discuss that?
Yeah.
So
Even though our office isn't directly involved in zone changes, but we certainly are interested. And as we're coming off the freeway right here, and right now this is, I believe, general plan agricultural, but eventually we would like to, if the market will bear it, and if the ground will bear it, we would like to see some retail here with a good buffer between this and the subdivision to the north, and somewhere along here, as it's appropriate, and as the market will bear it, some type of maybe small retail somewhere in this area, and as community development, and Sean's leading this effort on the west side master plan, a revision or update of that, we would hope that there would be some retail nodes, and again, appropriate to the size and to the convenience of the neighborhood, and have some commercial opportunities south of Center Street, west of I-15. Again, they won't be large, but it'll be, again, sufficient to what is appropriate to the size and demand of that area.
But the best opportunity is right down this area, closest to the actual interchange. And the west side plan that comes forward will have recommendations on what those areas should be and how they should be.
We've already actually come that far, and I've got a map that shows the different land uses broken through here that the neighborhood chairs in the committee have felt pretty comfortable with. And this whole piece, this steep growth piece south of the dike, would be, office related, commercial related type uses. And this green area, we're hoping, is where Footprinters Park would relocate. It's not set in stone, but they're going to want to relocate somewhere and expand their park. But we also have, I believe this is Geneva here, we have some commercial plan for this intersection, and then back up here by Center Street. So we're definitely anticipating that and seeing where it's appropriate.
Through sad experience, I've heard my biggest challenge has sometimes been that we create our own opposition. And I want to make sure that we're looking for, if we are planning on commercial development, we are planning enough ahead that neighborhoods are all aware of this is what we're doing here. We're going forward. So I'm glad to hear that you're actually doing that.
Well, so that will be done, but understand having in the plan won't preclude neighborhood opposition 5 years from now. So we'll do all we can.
This is the voice of experience.
I know. We'll do all we can to dictate what our intentions are, but
you'll never, I know.
If I may say, this trail and an open space, if we can connect that through, that has been really what's softening the blow with the neighborhood because they want a park, they want something that they can all use. And the new residents that come in are going to want the same thing, obviously. So if we have something that can bring connectivity through this whole area, it's going to be hard to do, but we have it in mind to get it through here as a starting point, and then follow the collector roads. And that last slide, if you could go to that, is just an example of what we kind of see along our collector roads. The trail would narrow to something like this, and then maybe open up into some old parks where we felt it would work. And we think that would be the best.
And I think one of the best things we can do for our economic development in the south end is get people to live there also.
Yeah, so again, long term, we talked about East Bay and some of the challenges they're facing. Certainly the west side development is not going to, in and of itself, save the East Bay area. It's too far out. But having proximity of housetops to our commercial areas with the appropriate buffers and distances, not too far, not too close, is really what will create and preserve the viability of those commercial areas. And again, so we are hoping, the mall is hoping that the entire west side at appropriate densities, not necessarily all 10,000 square foot lots, maybe a mix of development, but those are the types of uses and developments that they're looking for on the west side as that last area of developable area. Some of it commercial intermixed, but then again, housing housetops in proximity to the mall and to East Bay.
I should mention, I hope not to offend, but Mr. Decker assured me in our recent tour that efforts were being made to assure that the trail system would eventually link to the Bonneville Shore Trail.
Yeah, all that should all connect.
Splendid report. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Mr. Jones.
My understanding is that the administration has asked for a closed meeting for the purpose of discussing strategy regarding the sale of city property, and that is one of the approved reasons for holding a closed meeting under state statute. That someone would like to make a motion to close the meeting and removing it.
Are we ready for?
Yes, it should be there.
Well, if you make a motion to close the meeting and reconvene in the other conference.
Mr. Chair, I make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. Second. Thank you, Ms. Santiago. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.